Close your eyes. At the age of 15 years old, most girls have already heard these comments. He picks on you because he likes you. Don't wear that, you'll distract the boys. Don't be a slut. Nice rack. Don't be a prude. Well, what were you wearing? Well, how much did you drink that night? Boobs or butt? You're much prettier when you smile. I want to bang her. I want to hit that. You may open your eyes. These are all examples of objectifying comments, and these are all things that I've heard. Here's another list for you. Ben Affleck, Harvey Weinstein, George H.W. Bush, Donald Trump, Al Franken, Bill Cosby, Kevin Spacey, Roy Moore, Louis C.K., Richard Dreyfuss, Ryan Seacrest. This list of 10 people would be appalling in and of itself, but this is only a fraction of the 150 men who have been accused of sexual assault and harassment during the last 7 months. What is the breakdown in our society? Where is the disconnect? Where did we, and I do mean we as a collective whole, lose touch with our respect for women? What can be done to change this? What is causing this to happen? My name is Bisantz, and welcome to my senior thesis presentation. So these questions race through my mind. I'm disheartened to look around at myself, my family, my closest friends, and the country in which I live, only to see how many of the women I love and respect have been sexually assaulted, raped, and harassed. 1 out of every 6 women in the United States have been victims of sexual assault or a completed rape during her lifetime. There are women in this room that have been victims of sexual assault, harassment, and rape. Because the scope of this issue is very large, I needed to choose a specific cause and aspect of sexual violence on which to focus. So I decided to look at how the sexualization of women has affected the ways in which women are treated. During the past couple months, I've been digging deeper into these questions, looking specifically at how the sexualization of women perpetuates sexual violence. I focused mainly on 3 factors. 1, sociocultural norms. This is the cultural context and basis upon which women are sexualized. I then focused on the media and its effects on culture and the belief that women are sex objects. And 3, pornography, and how pornography perpetuates and normalizes sexual violence. I'm not going to cover all these factors with you. I'm going to focus specifically on media. But before I really get into it, I would like to talk about a part of this topic that makes me especially upset. There is a perception that sexual violence against women or the objectification of women is a women's issue or a feminist issue. But it's not. It's a human issue. And it is something that affects us all in one way or another, whether it affects the way we see ourselves or it affects the way we perceive others. So in order for us to fully appreciate and understand this, we must shift our perspective about who this is affecting. The question I asked myself at the beginning of the thesis was, to what extent does the sexualization of women in Western culture perpetuate sexual violence? And this was not an easy question to answer. In fact, there's no direct answer at all. But through inferences and research done around topics closely related, we can begin to see the complexity and the negative effects that come from the sexualization of women, and we can also begin to set up a framework for how the sexualization of women leads to sexual violence. So I would like to define the word sexualization for you, and it's as defined by the American Psychological Association. Sexualization occurs when individuals are regarded as sex objects and evaluated in terms of their physical characteristics and sexiness. Additionally, sexual harassment, abuse, assault, and exploitation in the form of prostitution and child pornography are extreme forms of sexualization. So another aspect of sexualization is rape culture. The sexualization of women lays the groundwork upon which rape culture exists and contributes to rape culture by supplying a constant stream of images to the mainstream, in which women are depicted as dehumanized and degraded versions of themselves. Feminists introduced this concept in the 1970s to highlight the ways in which society was blaming and shaming victims of sexual assault, and in turn, normalizing male sexual violence. Rape culture perpetuates the belief that women egg on men by provoking them by acting or dressing in certain ways. In this cultural milieu, rape is identified as an expected and normalized fact of life, and rape culture allows men to act as they please without being held responsible. Society teaches don't rape, or don't get raped rather than don't rape. And this rape culture then leads to rape myth acceptance, a concept that was also coined during the 1970s. Rape myths are defined as the attitudes and false beliefs about rape created by rape culture that perpetuate the way society views and responds to a rape. Common rape myths include the belief that women lie about sexual assault or rape in order to gain attention, and the admission of rape with claims that women led the man on or that she deserved it. These myths ultimately lead to the minimization of the seriousness of rape. So there's this idea that sex sells, right? We've all heard that. But when we hear that phrase, sex sells, we must ask ourselves, what is sex? In the media, sex takes the form of objectification. It takes the form of these sexualized depictions of women and men. If someone says sex sells about someone in real life, they are also referring to an objectified woman, because a woman is not sex. Sex is an action, not a human. In using this definition of what sex represents in the phrase sex sells, I would like to challenge that idea. It's not sex that sells, it's objectified women. And I say this because although men experience objectification, women are objectified in a more graphic way. So what does objectification mean? Well, objectification is a psychological action of degrading humans to mere objects. It creates a dehumanizing perception of women and their female bodies. The objectification of women's bodies can also be defined as the compartmentalization of different body parts into objects that are available for the use and pleasure of others. According to the objectification theory, female bodies are scrutinized and evaluated to a greater degree than those of male bodies. Caroline Heldman, a political professor, spoke at a TED event about sexual objectification, and she put together a test of 7 questions in order to categorize whether an image was sexually objectifying or not. So if the answer is yes to any of these 7 questions, then the image is sexually objectifying. And I'm only going to share a few with you. So first, does the image affirm the idea of violating the bodily integrity of a sexualized person that can't consent? In this image, we see a woman being pinned down by a man, and we see 3 men standing around. So although we don't know if there was consent in this photo, we get the sense that there's sexual aggression and that that's mainstream and normalized. This is a Dolce & Gabbana ad, which is a designer. The second question is, does the image suggest that the sexual availability is the defining characteristic of the person? So this is an ad for a suit supply. And we see here that the only reason this woman is there is to show her sexual availability. The third question is, does the image show a sexualized person as a commodity or something that can be bought and sold? Here we see this man standing at a vending machine with women in it, and he has to choose one. And this is an ad for shoes. Red tape. So, doesn't seem relevant. These images, while somewhat extreme, are not uncommon. Each of you can think of images that you have seen in magazines or on billboards that represent something like this. So again, I ask the question, what is this teaching our girls and what is this teaching our boys? A direct effect of objectification is self-objectification, which also normalizes sexual violence. So self-objectification is the internalization of this objectification culture. Self-objectification is a process of socialization where from a young age, girls are taught to think of and treat their own bodies as objects of others' desires. They see and treat themselves as things to be evaluated and looked at purely for their outward appearance. The American Psychological Association agrees, stating that though portraying oneself solely as a sexual object to be looked at is sometimes viewed by girls and women as exercising control over their sexuality, the presentation of the self in this way can be viewed as a form of self-objectification. And this is happening because of the sexualization of our media. Not surprisingly, this process has severe consequences for many girls, including mental health struggles, eating disorders, and lowered mental health, or lowered intellectual and physical performance. Self-objectification also contributes to a shifted understanding of consent. So I'm going to have everyone close their eyes again. I am a teenage girl, and I am objectifying myself. partly consciously and partly subconsciously. From a young age, I've grown up in a culture that believed me to be an object, so I began to believe it too. I dress only in ways that accentuate my most sexy parts, and I'm not doing it because it's comfortable. In fact, it's uncomfortable. I can't stop thinking about what I might look like to others and what my stomach looks like in my midriff. But I'm dressing like this because I want to be wanted. And what young girl does not want to be wanted? I am then engaged in a sexual encounter with a boy where he is at first gently pressuring me to have sex with him, and I say no. But he keeps pressuring me, and because subconsciously I see myself as this object of desire, I convince myself to believe that it is my duty to have sex with him. And I let him do what he wants with me because, well, I am the object, and he is the subject. And then I ask myself the question, was this rape? Did I consent? I don't know, I was confused. But I didn't say yes, and I didn't say no either. Open your eyes. This is a situation, scarily accurate, that has happened to girls that I call my friends. In advertisements and music videos, women are often portrayed as sexually ready and available for the pleasure of men. In a TED Talk called Growing Up in a Pornified Culture, Gail Dines says that many women in advertising have epitomized the fuck me look that has spread itself across magazine covers. The message from advertisers and the mass media to girls as eventual women is that they should always be sexually available, always have sex on their minds, be willing to be dominated, and even sexually aggressed against, and they will be gazed on as sexual objects. So I too, at 12 years old, as maybe some of you can relate, was a victim of this fuck me look, because I begged and begged and begged my mom to buy me 17 and Teen Vogue because those were the cool magazines at the time. So she finally gave in. Flipping through the pages, I would come across articles about how to make your boyfriend happy in bed or how to be the prettiest at prom. And at 12 years old, sex was normalized. And not sex in a healthy way, sex in the objectifying and self-objectifying way. The normalization of objectified sex should not be normal at 12 years old. The media allows women's bodies to be regarded as things that can be enhanced, modified, and exploited by both themselves and others. Bodily exploitation can take the form of sexual violence and harassment, as well as prostitution and the selling of women's bodies to fulfill the sexual needs of others. This cycle fosters a toxic and unrealistic view of women and sex. In fact, sexual assault and violence is a consequence of a dehumanized perception of female bodies that aggressors acquire through their exposure and interpretation of objectified body images. So, 2 popular men's magazines were analyzed, and it was found that 80% of women were depicted as sex objects. Not only are women shown as sexually available and provocatively dressed, it was also found to be true that female models were much more likely than male models to be put in sexually exploitive positions. 80% of women were posed in sexually exploitive postures, while this was only the case for 17% of men. There is also evidence and clear conclusions that can be drawn specifically from sexual harassment in TV shows. Let's look at this. In 81 TV episodes examined, 84% of those episodes showcased at least one incident of sexual harassment. The most common incidents were sexist and demeaning comments made by men towards women about their bodies and demeanors. In another study done, 74% of the episodes analyzed contained one incident of gender harassment in the form of jokes, where more often than not, these jokes were followed by laugh tracks. But this isn't funny. This tactic of subconscious coercion done by the creators of the shows created a sense of normalcy and humor around the harassment. The media has perpetuated and normalized sexual violence by exposing viewers to sexist beliefs and the acceptance of violence against women. Several studies have shown that women and men exposed to sexually objectifying images of women from mainstream media were found to be significantly more accepting of rape myths, sexual harassment, sexual stereotypes, interpersonal violence, and adversarial sexual beliefs. If young girls and boys are spending upwards of 5 hours a day on some sort of media, they are bound to begin internalizing and taking what they see to heart. How will this affect boys? Well, boys are being sold an idea that they must be strong and dominant for a woman to want them or desire them. Let's take a look at this image. Just as girls are being shown that they must be sexually and readily available, boys are being told by the media and society that they must take control and take over the woman in a sexual way. They are subjects while women are objects. Advertisements often focus on masculine dominance and female submissiveness. Boys are being congratulated on college campuses for their sexual conquests and sleeping around, while girls are being slut-shamed and stared at for having been with the same amount of people. And while I have been showing a lot of advertisements as examples of objectification, it is also in music videos, TV shows, movies, and other forms of media. So you know when you're sitting on the couch and you're watching a movie with your parents and an awkward sex scene comes on, where the camera sits on the women's breasts or butt for an awkwardly long amount of time? That is objectification, and this is a clear example of the way in which our society treats objectification. Because sitting there on the couch, it's uncomfortable. We look away. And we've all been exposed to it, whether we realize that that was objectification or not. But we don't do anything about it because a part of us might even like it. So while the things they see may not immediately affect them, adolescents will be influenced by them in the long run. I'm not saying that watching TV or looking at objectifying images of women will automatically lead to a sexually violent young man. However, it does instill a sense of normalcy around the negative ways in which women are treated, which can lead to a perpetuation of rape culture and rape myth acceptance. Because of this culture that is perpetuated, I've had friends come to me and say, with guilt in their eyes, but it wasn't his fault. But he wanted it. That's what he likes. Some have even blamed themselves for the inappropriate sexual advances of another man. And I look at them and I say, no. I refuse to let you believe that you have no power in your sexual encounters, or that you are the object that the media depicts you as. Because of this culture, I have seen boys and girls not hear the word no for what it really means. Because of this culture, I have seen girls smile when whistled at as if being catcalled on the street by a stranger is a compliment. Because of this culture, I've been afraid to walk alone at night, and I've been told to cover up my chest in order to protect myself. So on that note I say, and in the words of Rupi Kaur, I apologize to all the women I have called pretty. Before I have called them intelligent or brave. I'm sorry I made it sound as though something as simple as what you're born with is the most you have to be proud of. When your spirit has crushed mountains, from now on I will say things like, you are resilient, or you are extraordinary, not because I don't think you're pretty, but because I think you're so much more than that. The first step to solving this issue is understanding and becoming aware of what is happening around us and in the media. As friends and family, we must talk about what consent is, what the implications of objectification are, and what respect means. The objectification of women will be hard to change as it is deeply embedded in our culture. It should make you uncomfortable, and for some, it may even be hard to believe. Sex should be respected and discussed in a healthy way, and not used to sell more magazine editions. We must shift the narrative that men are subjects, dominant and controlling, and women are objects, submissive and at the mercy of others. This is our duty, as friends, as siblings, as parents, and as teachers, to honor our boys and respect our women. Thank you.